The character of James Bond, or 007, is probably one of the most recognizable characters in all of cinema history. I mean, the odds are that every single one of you has seen at least one Bond movie in your lifetime, and at the very least, you definitely know who James Bond is. And of all of the recognizable James Bond fare in the world, I think easily one of the most recognizable pieces of James Bond media is Goldeneye. Now, this movie is interesting for a lot of reasons. Number one, it was the first completely original James Bond movie, as in it had no references or ties to anything that Ian Fleming had written before. In fact, this particular Bond movie has more firsts in it than any other James Bond film. It was the first one to use CGI and digital effects. It was the first completely original story. It was the first Bond movie shot in Russia. And of course, it was the first Bond movie to star Pierce Brosnan. That and so much more. So today we are going to take a look at the opening scene of Goldeneye and figure out why we love it so much. I'm Kier with JoBlo Originals, and you're watching Scene Breakdown.
Let's go.
1995's Goldeneye stars Pierce Brosnan as James Bond and Sean Bean as Alec, kind of the anti-James Bond. The movie was directed by Martin Campbell, who made The Mask of Zorro, The Legend of Zorro, and Casino Royale, another one of my favorite Bond movies. The story follows James Bond as he is on a mission to take down a Russian crime syndicate who has taken control of some space-based weapon called Goldeneye, and he of course has to stop them from using it to destroy everything. You know, I think this movie just came out at a good time for James Bond type stuff. You know, it was coming out of the 80s, midway into the 90s, so those kind of high-octane action movies were still popular, and the spy espionage thing was coming into play too. In fact, this was the first James Bond movie to be shot after the fall of the Soviet Union, and they filmed it in Russia, which did not go well, but we'll get into that later. And if I'm not mistaken, John Woo was originally approached to direct this movie, and although I'm sure he was honored, he did decline the chance to direct it. I mean, I'm glad. I think Martin Campbell's an awesome director, but can you imagine if John Woo would have made this movie? We're about to see the famous gun barrel opening, which is so iconic. We've seen it mimicked in video games. We've seen it mimicked in things like The Simpsons and Family Guy. It's so recognizable, and it actually came from this movie. So this gun barrel opening was OG, and it's so sick because we've seen it evolve so much over the years, but this is the first one we're about to watch. All right, so without any further ado, let's get into the scene. I got all kinds of good facts for you guys, so let's watch it. Oh, even the music. Just tell me, look at that and tell me that you don't remember this from like the video game, getting all excited about to play it, or when one of these movies would come on. Look at that. This is before they had drones, you know, this was like a helicopter shot with a long lens. Oh, and it looks so good. It's so cinematic. They filmed this in Russia. Oh, man. I get this feeling every time I watch this scene, or I get this numbness in my hands and feet because of how high up that is. I'm not even afraid of heights. Still makes me nervous. Now, this is actually the highest bungee jump ever done in a movie. I think they said it's something like 720 feet or 750 feet. Something like that, just super obnoxiously tall bungee jump. And it is intense. Oh, doesn't that make you feel numb? Now, that stunt guy actually is in this movie. He's got another cameo as one of the guys that gets shot in a helicopter. In slow motion, it almost looks graceful, but you know that had to hurt. I love it. So this actually too, because they shot this film in Russia, they actually had like a crew of German and Russian architects and engineers to help them with the movie that refused to be credited for the movie. So there's like somewhere out there in Russia, there's like a secret society of dudes who worked on this movie that no one knows. So that's pretty cool. I guess I would want the credit. Pierce Brosnan, man. Like, to me, I love Daniel Craig. Daniel Craig might be my favorite Bond, but Pierce Brosnan is kind of my Bond, you know? Definitely from my generation of James Bond. This was the first James Bond movie that was made after I was born. So this may very well be the first James Bond movie I was ever even aware of. I'm not sure. And I think there's just something nostalgic about Pierce Brosnan. His voice, even, it's just so damn James Bond to me. And originally, there was all kinds of people considered for this. So the studio assumed, as the movie was being made, that Timothy Dalton would be coming back to play James Bond. Of course, there's a whole story behind that. You guys should look into that. And Sean Bean, I believe, even got as far as almost getting cast as James Bond before he became Alec 006, who we're going to meet in this scene. Let's keep it going. I actually love this part. This is our introduction to Pierce Brosnan as Bond, and I love it.
Beg your pardon?
Iconic, instantly. Oh, I love it so much. There's a lot to this scene to love, but just the fact that we get this huge, incredible bungee jump stunt in slow motion, nice and crispy to start the movie, and a nice little wisecrack from Bond. You're just in it immediately. You're in for it. I believe, too, Paul McGann almost played Bond for this movie as well. He was, I think, cast, and he was like the original studio choice was Paul McGann. If you can imagine that, which I kind of can. I love the cinematography, the blocking and the lighting. Just everything in this scene is so cinematic. So for a long time to go between Bond movies, and then for this to be the first one back and this to be the first scene, love it. There he is. There's our boy.
You're late, 007.
Boromir.
To stop in the bathroom. Ready to save the world again? After you,
Could you ask for 2 more charming co-stars?
James? For England. For England, Alec.
Love it. There's something like so palpable about the cinematography in this scene. As I'm watching, I'm just kind of getting like swept up in it, you know? Concrete walls can look really boring, or they can look awesome. Wow. Look at the, just, I mean, the set design. I feel like now you wouldn't see this done practically, you know? Seeing all of that, it's like it's there. You can see those textures. You can almost feel them. I feel like now a lot of that would be composited in, which I get, you know? We're a big fan of green screen over here, obviously.
Set time is 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Check.
And the music, God, everything is done so well in this movie. Okay, I'm gonna pause it again. So, we're about to get into some of the gunfire of the movie, okay? And it's pretty intense stuff. They used real guns when they were making this. Now, of course, they were not using real ammunition. They were using blanks. But the weapons were real, and the sounds that they made in this room with all of this echoey metal around them were also real. So a lot of the cast and crew, in fact, I think everybody, minus the people that were getting the close-ups, had to have earplugs in their ears for this scene because all of that gunfire was happening for real. All of the echoes, all of those loud pops, that was all happening in real time. And so the crew, you got to imagine there's a guy that's supposed to be holding the boom mic, staying steady, and he's got to not flinch every time he hears a gun going off 5 feet away from him. So that's really funny to imagine as well. And it goes into a lot of the scenes that we break down on this show are iconic because of something that went into making them, as well as the product, right? So the scene itself, but then also the behind the scenes. And this is just kind of one of those small fun facts that I really think, you know, when you know it and you're watching this scene, it does make it kind of funny, but not in a bad way, just comical, you know? Let's keep it going. Sorry. I just cannot get over how beautiful this movie looks. Imagine earplugs.
Buy me a pint.
Also, there's a lot of shots. The wides you can't tell because Brosnan had to use his own hands, but there's a lot of shots where you'll see Bond's hands either picking up, you know, a sewer grate or loading a gun or driving a car. And for a lot of the close-ups of Bond's hands, that's actually Pierce Brosnan's son, Christopher Brosnan, because Pierce Brosnan had injured his hand at home before shooting. And so I guess it was swollen or, you know, broken or just ugly, gnarly, had a cut on it. And so they replaced his hands with his son's hands. And I also find that very funny because you would think, I would like to think, that the hands maybe don't make that big of a difference. It could have been anybody's hands. As long as they're roughly the same size and color, nobody's really going to know. But they went as far as to go, we got to get somebody that's going to have the most identical hands to Pierce Brosnan himself and get his son to do it. And I just think that's funny. So notice that too in this movie. Anytime you watch this movie, close-ups of the hands, that's his son. More explosive gunfire.
Original.
This is funny too because there are elements throughout this scene and throughout the whole movie that kind of will remind you of True Lies a little bit. And supposedly the original script to this movie was identical. It was basically True Lies, and so they had to change a lot of it during filming. I love this movie anyway, but I also love True Lies, you know? I could take a Bond version of that.
Move out. Throw down your weapon and walk towards me. Slowly.
Finish the job, James. Blow them all to hell.
You have 10 seconds.
So good. Sean Bean is so underrated, I feel.
9.
You know?
8.
I mean, like, unless you're like a Lord of the Rings fan, then you understand, but
5. 4. 3. 2.
For England, James!
Blow the gas tanks.
oh, this is so good. I love too, this is kind of a more rough and gruff James Bond that we're used to getting. At this time, we hadn't really seen, I gotta pause it before this is my favorite part of the scene. But at this point, we hadn't really seen a James Bond that was this kind of sweaty, this kind of on the ground, not so proper, you know? And I love it. He's improvising. Not Pierce Brosnan, the actor, is not improvising, but James Bond here is having to improvise. So he's got to hide behind this big wheel of, you know, explosive chemicals so that these guys don't shoot him. I just love how there's kind of a kinetic energy that comes from this scene, and it's all of these kind of like, you know, improvisational moments between him and 006 that force them to kind of think on their feet, and it's so much fun than just seeing something that goes exactly the way it was meant to. You know what I mean? I love this part. And it's so slow. Tell me you don't love this. Come on. What a sadist, this guy, huh? Huh? What do you guys think about that? Let me know. Shooting his own people. I cannot get over the cinematography. And of course, this is the 4K, so the colors look a lot crispier. Everything's a little bit sharper. Which, by the way, if you didn't know, this was the first James Bond movie to ever be released on DVD. If you guys even remember DVDs at this point, or even, I mean, unless you're a physical media lover, you probably don't care, but I find this very fascinating. Before this, you know, James Bond movies were being made in the 80s, so there was no DVD. So this one caught the DVD release. In fact, I believe this was one of the first movies in general released on DVD. I'm almost sure of that. That's crazy. Whew, kind of reminds me of how old I'm getting. Oh my God. You ever just watch a good James Bond movie and then start contemplating your own mortality? So that is the scene for the most part, guys. This movie is so worth watching. I highly recommend you go check it out if you're a fan of James Bond, but also if you're a fan of, you know, that lovable espionage vibe. But there is something so irreplaceable about Pierce Brosnan. I put him up there with one of the best to ever wear the tux. And a lot of you would agree, because this James Bond movie was the most successful Bond movie since Moonraker. That movie was in 1979. But of course, I want to know what you guys think of Goldeneye, and specifically the opening scene of Goldeneye, and is there any trivia or fun facts that I didn't mention here? Of course, don't forget to drop a like on the video and leave a comment letting me know what other iconic scenes you would like to see me break down here on JoBlo Originals. Take care, everybody. Bye.